Thank you so much for being here tonight with us on a Friday night, and it's 5:45. My name is Bill Nguyen, and I am director of Nguyen Art Foundation. We are a non-profit organization dedicated to the preservation, exhibition, and discussion surrounding contemporary art in Vietnam. And tonight, it is our pleasure to host this event in collaboration with Fulbright University. I will now pass the mic on to Hannah Corey, a faculty member of Fulbright University Vietnam, to do the proper introduction. Thank you.
So I'm very delighted to introduce Nguyen Trinh Thi tonight and our program as a collaboration between the Nguyen Art Foundation and the Art and Media Studies program at Fulbright University Vietnam, both of which emphasize the importance of art in and as education, knowledge production, and community building. And I also want to note that this program was made possible through support from the Luz Foundation and Asia Foundation. So Nguyen Trinh Thi is a Hanoi-based artist and filmmaker known for her efforts to organize collective forms of dialogue, practice, and research through her art and through institutional projects such as Hanoi Doc Lab, an independent center for experimental and documentary film, which she founded in 2009. Her postgraduate studies combined her interest in filmmaking with journalism and international relations, leading to her affinity with the essay poem. Realized through various installation and screening formats, her works have been shown at film festivals, as well as art biennials and major museum exhibitions. A signature trait of her filmmaking practice has been a constantly evolving approach towards citation, reuse, and editing of still and moving images, reflecting her ongoing exploration of improvisational and exploratory modes of cinematic narrative that skirt univocality and linearity. Many of Thi's films have been responsive to the politicized backdrop of everyday life in Vietnam and Asia more broadly, attending to the representation of such events and actions as making and unmaking history. Straddling ethnography and character-driven vignettes, films such as Chronicle of a Tape Recorded Over from 2010 situate the Ho Chi Minh Trail in present-day geography and mundane time. Others, such as 93 Years, 1,383 Days from 2008, and Jo Ha Q from 2012, reveal a predilection for stretching the possibilities of the moving lens in relation to the malleable relationship between image and sound. In the 2016 films 11 Men and Vietnam the Movie, Thi's material is film itself, and processes of sampling and editing expose historical cinematic productions of Vietnam as lived place of artists and filmmakers, and as Vietnam, a metaphor for war. A recurring use of montage affects a parallel between the multiplicity of media imagery and multivocality as a strategy to decenter an authorial source, an allegory for the impossibility of grasping historical complexities as relayed through a singular vantage point. Thi has experimented with different approaches to working with sound and practices of listening. Her recent installation projects foreground the experience of sound as a conduit between our immediate environment and changes in the natural world and its ecosystems. These include And They Die a Natural Death, inspired by an autobiographical novel by Bui Ngọc Thun, Soundless, in which the water levels of the Mekong River are relayed through a non-human musical ensemble, and 47 Days Soundless, an expanded cinema installation that invites audiences to reflect on the inextricable relationship between a place and its inhabitants. For this last work, Thi was the first recipient of the Moving Image Commission from the Hans Nefken Foundation, Singapore Art Museum, Mori Art Museum, and M+ in Hong Kong. Her recent exhibitions include installations at Artis Mundi in Wales, the Thailand Biennale, Documenta 15, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the 9th Asia-Pacific Triennial of Contemporary Art, the 21st Biennial of Sydney, the 13th Lyon Contemporary Art Biennial, and the 60th Venice Biennale. So I would like to just briefly introduce the two films that will be screened, or the two moving image works that will be screened tonight. Following this, we'll screen the two films, and then Thi will talk about her work, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A. So the first film is Every Day's the 70s. Is that right? That's the first one. Every Day's the 70s from 2018, in which different versions of the same history, one personal, another depicted by cinema, the third described by the media, are laid on top of each other and collapsed, mixing footage from 80s and 90s Hong Kong movies with wire service footage of the Vietnam War and the Vietnamese refugee crisis in Hong Kong from the late 70s until 1997, with an interview with the owner of Paul's Records in Hong Kong. Every Day's the 70s continues to explore Trinh Thi's interests in gaps, holes, and disconnections in between personal memories and history and other kinds of collective histories. The second work is 47 Days Soundless, which was initially shown as part of a multimedia installation, and for our purposes tonight is shown as a single channel video. 47 Days Soundless explores the relationship between sound and silence, vision, language, colors, and their absence. T identifies peripheries, including natural landscapes used as backdrops, uncredited characters, and soundtracks from American and Vietnamese movies that reveal more than human perspectives. Offering new ways of looking and listening, 40 Days Soundless invites audiences to reflect on the inextricable relationship between a place and its inhabitants. So please join me in thanking the Nguyen Art Foundation for hosting our event tonight and welcoming T and generously sharing her work with us.
I would just say briefly, so these two films that you are going to see, they are actually not supposed to be a single channel film, but they came from different channels in installations. So keep it in mind. It's a bit challenging sometimes because I had to collect all the screens and also all the different sources of sound into a single channel. So just try to imagine them in installation.
The boys in my neighborhood, they were always hiding from when you reach 18, they will come and send you to the war. And the boys in my neighborhood, they were like several years older than I was, and they were sent to the war, and some of them died and never come back. 73, 74, I was about like 16 to 17. So soon it will be my turn. Chinese New Year 75. when I reached here, I never expected the war would end so soon. And
Saigon, April 3rd, 8 o'clock. The last American helicopter on the roof of the American embassy prepares to lift off the last of the evacuees fleeing before the advancing communist armies. This scene, in fact every scene in this report, was filmed by a UPITN camera team who chose to remain behind in the beleaguered capital to record the final victory of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese in South Vietnam. By an ironic coincidence, as the overloaded ships cast off, their passengers watched helplessly as the last flights of American helicopters passed overhead, making for the certain safety of the American fleet out in the South China Sea.
Cả cầu nguyện cho đấy cũng đầy tháng cũng có một cách gọi là nó không làm như ngày xưa nữa, gần 20 năm là người ta theo cái khác. Bây giờ kinh thánh là bằng tiếng Israel. Đấy, khi ở đó bắt đầu là người ta truyền đạo từ Pháp, như là từ Pháp, tức là người Pháp người ta lên sớm, rồi là nó lên từ Bắc Giang lên, người ta lên theo cái dọc đấy lại gặp chúng tôi, cái nhà thờ hay là nhà rông, cái đó là truyền thống làng nào cũng có truyền thống. Thì thứ nhất là tức là người ta truyền đạo sớm hơn nhiều, rất là nhiều. Thế thì không có tên lành ấy. Còn ở đây thì bắt đầu là Pháp.
Thank you so much for coming today. I just I just put so many things in the slides, and but maybe I would have to kind of improvise. So I kind of follow the title that maybe Bill gave to the or Pamela gave to the presentation as Soundless. That was a title of a recent work, the one I made in Chiang Rai for the Thailand Biennale. And actually, the second film that you just saw, it also has Soundless in the title, but it's 47 days Soundless. Somehow in the last couple of years, I had so many Soundless work, and but actually they were about sound and listening. So so I think I would try to cover you know that aspect of my work. In the last few years, I have been very interested in working with sound and listening. But when I just watched the two films, I also realized that they were a lot about archives as well. So maybe that's another aspect that we can talk about. So I I rarely talk about this work, but I decided that I would show it today because it's kind of relate to the location of us now. This work was it's kind of relate to Ho Chi Minh, Saigon, and the main character, the guy who I talked to in Hong Kong, he was born in Saigon, in Chinatown, and his family came from China back, like, you know, from maybe his grandfather's generation, from both sides, from like his father's and mother's side. They came from different places in China, and in a way, this work was kind of my continuation of Vietnam the movie that I just talked about in the class in Fulbright. And for Vietnam the movie, I work with a lot of movies from around the world, but mostly like Hollywood, American movies, and European. There were a few movies in Vietnam the movie that came from Asia, like maybe one from Japan, Korea, India, Hong Kong. But the representation of movies from Asia will be like very little compared to Western movies. And so when I had the chance to do a short residency in Hong Kong in 2018, I didn't really know what I would do in Hong Kong, and I thought that maybe it's a good chance to kind of expand the research for Vietnam the movie, because, you know, like Hong Kong, it's a place where there have been like a very big film production, and I started to search, and I found several films that were made in Hong Kong, and they would be relating to Vietnam, especially the Vietnam War. So I thought that like when I go to Hong Kong, I would kind of expand this research and try to find more Asian films that would talk about Vietnam, and I think that could be something interesting, because I think like through the popular movies like Hollywood, we can see how all different countries kind of political position on something like Vietnam, for example. And you can imagine that would happen during the Cold War, and like in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam would be on one side. North Vietnam would be on one side, the communist side, and then basically the rest of Southeast Asia would be on the other side of the Cold War. And so I was kind of interested in seeing how this division would be reflected through popular movies. Because in a way, like in Vietnam, the movie, you already see, how that kind of the view from outside of Vietnam, but reflected through the kind of popular movies. And I was interested in looking at popular movies like Hollywood movies, more rather than like documentary films, because I think that actually the popular movies would kind of reflect our collective memory better, because like almost like everyone would see these kind of films. And so like if people live in that area, in that period, everyone would see all these like Hollywood movies, for example, of the Vietnam War. So in Hong Kong, I met this guy called, his name is Paul, and he owns a very big collection of records, and he has a record shop, and he so I talked to him, and he told me about the time when he was when he left when he was 17, and quite ironically, he left just like 10 weeks before the war ended. So he left, he arrived in Hong Kong like at Lunar New Year, and then, in April, the war ended. And when I talked to him, I realized that I had such a prejudice, because I would started to ask him the kind of questions like when you live in Vietnam during the war, was that like really terrible, and was that like, did you suffer or stuff like that? And he said, no, actually, I really enjoy my time. I really love it. I love the 70s. Every day I listen to music and, like riding around, and he just has the best of his time. So I kind of like, it really struck me, and I started to realize that we usually think of history from the point of view of kind of the official kind of history, and we would assume that if you like live during the war, of course that you would be some kind of like victim or something. But not only this time, but like with other projects too, like when I talk to people of their personal memories, I realized that really like personal memories is so different from the official history. Like it's something that it happened to you personally and to the moments, and maybe that was the point when you had some kind of like really something that is really personal, and it doesn't really matter if you are living in a really terrible time or not. So that is something that is really interesting to me. And so at the same time, I was doing the research, continue to do the research on, I try to collect as many films as possible from Hong Kong that was related to Vietnam. So of course, most of them would be relating to the Vietnam War time, and then I started to see also other Hong Kong movies that would started to talk about the Vietnamese refugees living in Hong Kong, and also like television programs. And so I kind of have these two versions of the same history. So I have the movie version, and then I have the personal story. And actually, when I came back to Vietnam, I started to try to think like how to make this work. And I think at some point I thought of a form that I really like. Do you remember Kurosawa's Rashomon? So I really like that concept of like one story told many times and told from many different points of view. So I thought that maybe I would tell this story from kind of different points of view. And I, at the end, somehow I decided to look into the representation of the same period by the media or by news, and I found a very interesting archives of AP, Associated Press, the news agency, American, and they have these AP archives that they cover, the Vietnam War and also the Vietnamese refugees in Hong Kong. So they cover all these periods. And but it was very interesting that I found in their archive kind of like more like raw material, because they are news agencies. So sometimes they just shoot the whole scene and then they sell it to different people. And I was looking at their archives. Actually, I was very interested in. Do you know the term B-roll? Like in news, like when you cover some news, and you would cover like the main events or you cover the interviews, but then the B-roll is kind of like the environment of the place where this news happened. So the cameraman, maybe he would just like kind of shoot the scene. So for example, the Hong Kong refugees, they would just shoot like a scene outside of the camp. And there was basically, it was really boring. It was like nothing happened. You just see kind of the empty landscape of the environment just outside of the camp. And with the kind of, a bit kind of like a white noise. But I was very interested in this kind of environment shot. And I wanted to use this, both the footage, the image, and also the sound. And at the end, I decided to tell this story from different angles, different representation. Like one is by the media, one is by movie, and one is by the music, the records. And then the last one was by this man, Paul, kind of like narrating his life. And so the installation, the installation actually, the main experiment for this work is actually sound, and I plan for the different soundtracks to tell kind of different stories. So in the installation, you see the same image, but depending on where you sit or stand, you know, which sound you would listen to. So maybe one, you would listen to mostly this kind of white noise of the refugee camp, and the other you would hear all the sound coming from the movies, and one you would hear mostly the music coming from the record store. So yeah, so it really depends on what sound you listen to kind of understand the story. Yeah, so I think maybe I would cover the two films that we just saw first, and then if we have time, I come back to other projects. Yeah, so this one is the one that we just saw, but it's in the installation. I have two films, two screens on two sides of the room, and in the middle I have the third projection. And this projector actually, it projects onto a set of mirrors, and the reflection from the mirrors would be kind of like covering the space from everywhere, and you also see the image on the floor as well. So it's so I think that I think the term expanded cinema kind of work for this installation, and for me this work is kind of at the beginning of the work is I kind of set up this challenge for myself to how to combine film and kind of spatial installation, because if some of you, maybe if you are filmmakers or you also do installation, you would understand that film cinema and installation that use space have like a two really opposite modes of watching, very different from each other. Like for the film or cinema, you have a committed audience. You have the full attention of the audience who would sit down and watch from the beginning to end, and then you kind of like trying to tell a story or something. But you can guarantee the full attention. But for spatial installation, you don't have that. It is very kind of attention is very fragmented, and the audience is totally flexible, and they can come and go anytime, and they can look at different things, and they can like really relate to the space and maybe walk around or something. And yes, so the attention thing, it's very, very different from for a film. But for this work, I really wanted to somehow to combine these two. So I kind of wanted, maybe I'm too greedy. I wanted everything. You know, I wanted like both the full attention of audience, and then also, and I also want for the audience to experience the space. So that's why I kind of, you know, making it in this way, and it's also it's also relevant to the content of the work as well. Yeah, so this work, I can tell you, what is it? So the starting point, you know, for a long time, I work with many different kinds of found footage and archival footage, including many Vietnamese movies and Hollywood movies, all kind of like narrative films. And I thought of this kind of observation of, you know, especially when I'm increasingly interested in ecology and kind of non-human beings and nature. I was thinking of movies, especially the like Hollywood movies about the Vietnam War, that actually they mainly shot these movies in other countries in Southeast Asia, because the landscape of like the Philippines or Thailand were really like similar to Vietnam, and so they would shoot all these movies to talk about the Vietnam War, but like shooting in the Philippines or Thailand or Malaysia or something, and of course, you know, like if you look at the backgrounds, the nature, the jungle in these films, they were there, but they were really just like the backdrop, and also the use of maybe like indigenous people or local people in these movies. So, for example, like Apocalypse Now, it's an interesting story that the Ifugao people, the indigenous people in the Philippines, the whole village of the Ifugao people were hired to act in Apocalypse Now as indigenous people in Vietnam. So the Ifugao people actually became like a stand-ins for people from Vietnam. So my idea for this work is to kind of reverse, you know, to reverse that and to kind of refocus, take out all the natural elements, the forest and the trees, the non-human beings, kind of out of these films, and make it into the main character of the film. And yeah, so I started to do that, and then I kind of realized that this is not really just about you know, like Hollywood movies, but I realized that this is kind of broader than that. It's more kind of like the relationship between the human and non-human. You know, in these kind of films, the human it's always the center, and so I just kind of wanted to kind of expand it, so it's not just about like, you know, like Hollywood or the West or something, but I think this is now the thing is more between like human and non-human. So I started to include also like Vietnamese movies, but I realized that these two sides, the Hollywood movies and the Vietnamese movies, they are both about the Vietnam War. Actually, they are like the two sides of the war. But when you look at the way they look at nature, it's not different from each other. And to kind of take the natural elements in this kind of film, it's quite difficult, and it's not a lot, because you know the human figures are always everywhere. It's full in the film. You know, like actually I watch more films to to work with, but many films I couldn't get any kind of natural elements. So this work for me is really kind of a process of cleaning and stitching and reversing the focus. So I really kind of had to take like really small parts from many films, and also kind of like the natural soundtrack from these films, but it's really little. And I also use my own footage that I shot from before when I work in the previous project, when I worked with the Jarai people in central Vietnam. This is the three novels by Ursula Le Guin. Their own like sci-fi, and I don't know if you know, the word for one is forest. This novel, she wrote it in 1971 or 2, and that is a kind of a direct response to the Vietnam War. But she wrote it in a kind of a sci-fi kind of novel of like a group of human going to a planet and to colonize that planet. So I took like different details from 3 of her novels and to kind of stitch them together and to make this kind of story that kind of holds the work together. So it kind of become this loose story of a man who was abandoned in the jungle, and he lost his memory, and he didn't know who he was. Maybe that's the end. How many more minutes do I have? I don't know. Oh, okay. So maybe I talk quickly about the work in Chiang Rai, because it's also another soundless one. So before the soundless work in Chiang Rai, I did this project called Unveiling Natural Death for Documenta, and this work is the first work that I work with, not with a film, not with camera, but I work with sound and musical instruments and also technology. These images you see there was created by light, but kind of used kind of a form of shadow puppet. And in this work I work with a musical instrument maker, to create this flutes that could be played automatically and reading the wind coming from the jungle in northern Vietnam. And to work with it, and I came to this very interesting local organization in Chiang Khong. They are kind of like a local environmentalist, and they have worked to defend the river for many years. And actually, last year they won a case that, so this kind of victory was very rare, you know, in Southeast Asia, that they could win a case against like a, you know, big government project of. So in the river, there was a project between China and Thailand that, you know, they would blast the bottom of the river to widen the Mekong, so that they could bring like so many tourists from China on a big cruise ship. So that project already started to happen, and that would really change the ecology of the river. So they protested against this project for more than 10 years, and finally the Thailand government had to decide to stop it. And I continue to want to work with like indigenous musical instruments. So I also visited different groups and see how they use their instruments. And I travel kind of along the Mekong River into many locations to try to record the river. Like I use the hydro phone, hydro mic, and try to kind of put it like to listen to the river. So that's the many points that we came. They are all like kind of important historical or spiritual points along the river that we came to, and we try to listen to or record the river at those points. And then we built this water turbine and put it in the river at the Mekong School to collect, to generate electricity that would give the water sensor. We use the water sensor to collect the data of the water level, and this kind of real-time data would be transmitted to, this is the exhibition space. And so the real-time data would automate this is inside the space. It's really beautiful kind of temple that was made of so many old wooden houses that would show the culture and the spiritual life of the Lana culture, which is the northern Thailand and Laos. And inside there's Buddhist shrine that people still come in and pray. So it's a very spiritual space, and it's very interesting experience for me, because you know, how would you kind of like show some artwork in such a spiritual space? And I thought that a sound work would be better than a visual work. I feel like sound has this kind of, you know, because sound is like environment, it's not imposing itself, you know, into the environment. It's more kind of like, you know, like mingle together with the environment, and also it kind of has this kind of spiritual dimension. So I decided not to make any film or not to project anything, but I just do sound. And this is the space inside. There are so many kind of sacred spiritual objects that they collected from northern Thailand to you know, the kind of like Buddhist altars and everything. And so I decided to use this Thai instrument called the Ranat egg. So the Ranat egg has many wooden pieces, and I took them apart and built kind of automation to let them play in the space. And I also use this flute that I also use the same flute in Documenta. And I also work with kind of data that they collected over the 70 years for the Mekong River that show the flow over the month of the Mekong. I have two graphs on top of each other. One is the natural flow, and the other is the flow that has been altered since the dam construction in China. So then you have the like two different graphs on top of each other, and I put them on the music shaft and turn them into music notes. So I came up with these music notes from the graphs, and this is all the instruments that we made. And I put the instruments kind of like behind all the sacred objects. Yeah, so I think we don't have time to see the video, but I can talk more.
Great, thank you so much, T. So I think I think because we are only have about 15 minutes or so left, I think it's better to just open to the audience. I'm sure there's some burning questions. So who would like to be brave and go first? There's a hand up right there. Okay, one and then two in the back.
Hi, so first of all, thank you for showing the work. I think I have two questions. First, I want to ask about like during when we judge the works, like there's been this glitching, folding. At first, I thought it's intentional. That is it? Is it intentional? And if it's not, it's just an error of the display of the screen. So as an artist of this work, how do you think about this very arbitrary, random glitching, and how it affects your works? And secondly, I want to ask about the second works when, so like when you have like the sound and the image itself, but there's also like this subtitle, and that subtitle is not it's not the transcription of the sound in the works. And to me, as an audience, when I reading the subtitle at the same time when watching and hearing, it is kind of have this this connection, this interaction in my head. So from the point of view making this, so what is your intention and what do you expect the audience to interact with all the displayment of the language, the sound and the image? Thank you.
Oh, the glitches in the film, I'm not sure if you talk about like sometimes it's become black, is that what? Or it just sometimes it's kind of like bad quality. That is, I think that is the projector. That's the projector, it's not me. But it's true that like many of these films are also like really kind of bad quality. It's like sometimes like really low resolution, or it just make kind of weird colors and everything. Because I collected this own kind of material from everywhere, and a lot of them would be from the internet or like very old tapes or something, you know, from the archives. It's just the quality of the material. But sometimes, most of the time, I don't mind the low quality. I think it's kind of a part of the aesthetics of the archives, and it's kind of show the period and the time elements of this material. And then the other question is the difference in the voice and in the subtitle, right? So first I worked with the text, and I wanted to create this fictional story, and actually this would work differently for people who can understand Vietnamese or people who don't, because like for foreigner, if they see this, they would just assume that this subtitle is for what these guys are talking about. You know, to me, first it was kind of like something that I put together, and then but then I kind of like that effect, and I kind of like the fact that as an audience, actually you don't have the full access to what people are talking about. I think, like, to me, it's kind of like showing some kind of respect, because I feel like we sometimes assume kind of like too much privilege, you know, going into all kind of geographies or communities or anything. Like we can be journalists, or we can be artists, we can be filmmakers, we can be researchers, and we have our gaze, you know, and we try to grab to kind of mine, you know, all kind of things, and I feel like, you know, like a lot of time, you know, all these people, they should have the right to be left alone, you know, like, you know, they don't have to be so naked, you know, and to reveal everything. So I feel like, you know, if the audience, if they can just read the fiction and they think that they understand what these people are talking about, it's actually good. Yeah, and I also kind of like enjoy the fact that different people have different kind of access to different things. So in everyday is the 70s, for example. You remember one part that, when the woman, she was interviewed, and she would be like marrying a Hong Kong guy, so she could kind of get out of the camp, and she was talking in Vietnamese, and And I just left it there, and I didn't want to put the caption. I didn't want to translate it, and I thought that, you know, sometimes as Vietnamese, as people who can understand Vietnamese, we should have some advantage over other people, over people who can speak English. And so I just leave it like that. And then, you know, in the audience sometimes there would be Vietnamese people who are the only one who can understand it. And yeah, so sometimes I have just kind of little rebellious kind of thing like that. And so it's kind of the same with the second one, that you know, for some part the guy was talking in Jerai, and we as Vietnamese, we also don't understand it. So if there was not Vietnamese in there, and if you watch it and you just listen to the Jerai, you probably would assume that you understand what he was talking about. But for the Vietnamese part, when you understand, and if you kind of catch some words or some sentences sometimes, you can kind of start to feel the puzzle, and you kind of imagine the parallel stories, you know, between what they were talking about and the fiction. The Jerai people, when they were talking in there, they were telling me about the history of Christianity coming to Central Highlands, and how their kind of animistic rituals have disappeared as a result. So in some way, it has some kind of connection with the fiction story. But I mean, I started to do these things that that always have different elements, and they connect with each other at some point, or sometimes parallel, sometimes contrast, and they never really kind of follow any rule. So it's sometimes maybe it's kind of a headache for you to try to follow everything.
Hi, thank you again for your films. So my question is, what was your intentions of choosing 2 channels and 3 channels in displaying your visuals in the films? And also, I just wanted to ask to clarify, for the first part, like for the first film, the story is depend on the fictions, right? Or is it like the story, the personal story from the Hong Kong guy that you met? And if so, I want to ask about your thoughts on personal stories as well as like collective stories displayed in your film and how they interact. Thank you.
For me, the first one, if it really worked, and when I created, I think that's an experiment, especially with the sound and you know, how the story and the feeling of the story would change depending purely on the soundtrack, because from every position you still see these 3 channels, but you hear different soundtrack, and you don't always hear the poem's personal story. Maybe you can, like for the whole, I imagine that for the whole film, maybe you just listen to like a really boring sound of the camp, of outside of the camp, of the environment of the camp, and how would you feel then? Or the whole film you would hear only sound coming from movies, or the whole film you just like sitting in Paul's record store. Yeah, so it's like different experience. And what is the other question?
The second question is because the later part of the second film is, as I understand from your presentations, it depends on a fictions, and you tell the story of the fictions with the visuals of combination of different films. And then, like the first film, as you told the story of you meeting Paul in Hong Kong, so that story is Paul's personal stories, or is it depends on the fictions? And if it's Paul's personal stories, what do you think about the interaction of collective story, which is the visual that you use from Hollywood films, and the personal story that Paul's are telling?
I'm not sure I understand totally, but I think that for that film, for the first one, I just kind of like try to put, you know, different representation of kind of the same history. You know, you can see that one is like this, all the periods in history was represented. You know, like one is like through the news, and the other is like the movies, and the other one is personal story, memory. And yeah, basically they're just like, I think all these things in life, they just exist side by side, and I don't care if they are in line with each other. Maybe they are completely different from each other, and yeah, but they just coexist. And you know, at some point, at many points, they kind of coincide. And sometimes I switch screen. It's kind of like, you know, at some point you just lose direction, and maybe fiction become documentary or something like that. And I think the other story you had with why, like, on this screen, right? Like for the second film. I think for the second one, when I made it, I was thinking a lot about peripheral vision, and I was interested in how to show visual in a kind of like peripheral kind of way, you know. So it's, in a way, the visual would function more like sound, because, you know, sound is happening in the environments everywhere around you and everything. But the visual is always just like in front of you, and you just have kind of a one kind of relationship, and you kind of look straight into the visual. But for the work before this one, I already kind of made it in a way that challenged the normal viewing habit of audience, that you always just like, you know, watch it like this. But now, like, I started to put screen around the people, and so like maybe you would feel very frustrated, because I think the audience usually we love to control, and we need to be able to see everything at once. We would feel so frustrated if we would miss that something happened in our back. And so this one is kind of like that I had these two films that I put parallel to each other. And in the film, actually, if you remember, there was a line saying that there is no seeing everything at once. It's kind of like in the jungle too. You know, in the jungle you cannot see everything, and so now maybe you have to kind of learn the new way of watching, that you cannot see everything. And actually, if you sit in the middle, in between the two screens, I think many times the two screens, the images kind of happen like in the peripheral vision. You know peripheral vision, right? Like some things that happen at the corner of your eye. It's not in front of your eyes. But it's very important. Like when you drive your motorbike, or you drive a car, or you play sport, the peripheral vision is what would save you. And it's very important for your safety. And it kind of bypasses the logic, the thinking. So it's very physical. So I'm kind of interested in that.
Word. So I'm asking whether in making these this work, do you have also a prompt? That's the first question. The prompt for a sound. And the second question is that whether or not that prompt for making the work also translated into the prompt that you might also do for the installation for that work. So yeah, that's my two questions.
Not sure I understand the second part, but I try to answer the first part. So for Evidence the 70s, the rule for the fiction one would be I would only use one actor. So it's kind of similar like 11 Men, with Nguyen as the only actress throughout. In this one, I also have to use only one actor. So that is Tonilan Kafai. And his first role that I use in here was from The Lover. I'm sure you recognize that. Yeah, so it's a room for me for the fiction one. So I had to follow him through many films. So actually, I also used many films, some films that didn't relate to Vietnam, but still had him in it. But most of them were films that kind of relate to Vietnam. Some film would be relating to the Vietnam War, and some would be relating to the Vietnamese refugees story. And for the news one, I would follow the timeline, the timeline of history of following what Paul was talking about, from the Vietnam War to like leaving Vietnam, going to Hong Kong, and then the refugee time, and also I was using a lot of B-roll as well. Like when I realized that I'm interested in the B-roll, I just use mostly that. So you see many scenes of just kind of outside of the refugee camps, and yeah, so that is basically it. And for the other one, it's maybe more simple. That I just like really try to find the scenes on these movies that had nature in it, and I would kind of zoom into the background and kind of get rid of the people. Mostly that.
Do we need to wrap up? Oh, we don't have to leave at a certain time? Okay, sorry. Perhaps one more question.
Okay, hi, Director Nguyen Trinh Thi, and I very appreciate your practice and what you have done so far for Vietnamese contemporary art. And when I learn about your film, I have a lot of concern, especially when it comes to I think Ep Hoang and all the guys also sharing when like the narration, the subtitle, the matching with the like what the character said in the film, and sometimes like we have a lot of things to digest in a single frame. Like you use like 3 single frame at the same time, and there are a lot of narrative like come together. And sometimes like I lost my focus, like something about like focal point, like what is the direction at the end of the day when your film makes it hard to see. And maybe it's also about the idea like it actually the reaction we're supposed to have when it comes to the reality toward the subject matter. But sometimes like I really hope to learn something about the subject matter, something about the problem or the issue, but at the same time because like the opposite direction sometimes dominate it, so it's make it like again like make it hard to see for me like at some point. So I really want to hear your thought on it. Like, do you have any about it? Like, yeah, thank you.
No, I think maybe it's a bit different. Yeah, not having free access to cultures or communities is a different thing. I understand it. It's what you mean is like it's a bit difficult to follow, right? It's inaccessible. Well, I mean, I try my best. I think seeing this as a single channel is also more difficult, because then now everything is condensed. But I think in the installation, you can take your time, and you can maybe at one point you can just focus on one thing. But I hear many times that many people, they have to watch the work for many times, and every time they would find something new. But I think it's true that my work usually it's quite dense. It has many layers and many references and connecting to many things, and also like very kind of demanding in terms of attention. And attention not only with one sense, but with different senses. Like maybe at the same time you have to read, and you have to think, you have to listen, and then maybe listen to different things. So I think yeah, it's true.
I think in general, in general, speaking of sound, I think watching artists' moving image works demands a different mode of spectatorship, and spectatorship doesn't capture what it demands from you. It demands much more than that. So it forces you to shift out of a certain mode of viewing that you're used to and that you're comfortable with when you're watching mainstream narrative films, for example. This is something that demands a lot of work on your part to navigate the senses, to constellate them, and to think as well. So I understand your difficulties with watching this kind of work, but it is something you have to practice. Okay. Is there a... Yes, Jacqueline?
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your work and your thought process in making these works. It's really illuminating, I think, especially for students to hear walking through your work. I want to return to the first film. There's something that really struck me when you met Paul, and that you mentioned how you had prejudice about his experience of living in Saigon before his departure. And I'd like you to unpack a little bit more. What was that prejudice? What were your expectations of Paul's upbringing in Saigon before the end of the war? and also why then in the selection of the films you've chosen mostly foreign films to accompany his narrative and not films from Vietnam, that maybe was part of your construction of his upbringing or his life prior his departure. So I guess is your relationship to your own expectations of his narrative and the ideological construction of this narrative.
So can you remind me the first question? First question?
So it's one question, but divide up in two parts. If you could unpack a little bit more what you mentioned about your prejudice, and you were surprised about his answer.
Right. Yeah, I guess like we would just we always kind of have this expectation and imagination that it's just you can just take it so much for granted that, you know, like if you just think of this is a wartime, of course, you know, like you live in that time, of course your time would be bad, you know, it would be terrible, and it just came so naturally that I didn't really need to think twice, you know, like, you know, of course I would imagine things that, like, you know, there would be fighting and maybe like bombing or killing or blood and everything everywhere, and of course you live in that time and of course it's terrible. So, you know, I immediately asked him something kind of like that, and he just like, no, my time was great. It's the best. It's the best time that I had ever. So that really woke me up. And that really kind of, oh, you know, like there's, then it kind of like made me really think about, you know, the difference in all these kind of histories. You know, like the official history and what people would think as associations with this kind of history and events, and then you have all kind of like really personal memories of the same history that might, you know, not that have nothing to do with each other. Yeah. So, and then why foreign films? I never really thought about this, but I think it's probably kind of makes sense because he's Chinese, and he in his family history he talked about like how his grandparents came to live in Vietnam, like you know, maybe 100 years ago or something, and yeah, and then like grew up in Chinatown and left, and then go to live in Hong Kong, and so the movies that I already found before of the Vietnam War from Hong Kong, they already had kind of this kind of connection, you know. So they were also like, you know, like people from China or from Hong Kong, and then, you know, come to make the films in Vietnam, and then all the movies that I found that relate to the Vietnamese refugees in Hong Kong, the popular movies in Hong Kong or television, they also reflect the viewpoint of how Hong Kong people or Hong Kong government look at refugees. So the role or or the way, the image of the Vietnamese refugees in these Hong Kong movies, they are really like, they are like criminals. You know, they are like, you know, just people who live in a camp, and or maybe they would, you know, that kind of like really, you know, the way they look at refugees. So I think it's kind of makes sense to use their movie.
So I think we do have to wrap up. I'm just mindful of the time. Thank you everyone for coming, and please thank our guest speaker.